do the blessing. Thank you, Craig. If we join together, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. So we're looking at Midrash as written by these women, Israeli women, who have become scholars in Jewish traditional literature and are writing modern Midrash in a traditional form. We're going to not look at Noach today. We're actually going to look at Breshit, last week's Torah portion. And then if we have time, we'll move on to Sarah, to the first matriarch, and look at some aspect of the way her life is depicted. We have this session and next week, and then in the spring, I think, in the late fall or winter, we have 3 more sessions with this. This is all very new stuff. It only came to the Jewish world in the last 15, 20 years. And in English, it was only produced last summer, a year ago summer, and only in part. A lot of it is still in Hebrew, and available on Sefaria, but not in translation. So we're going to be looking at a few Midrashim, and we'll be talking about them. So I'm going to screen share. This is we're going to be doing Genesis 1:1. So that should be pretty familiar to all of you, right? In the beginning, while God was creating the heavens and the earth. So it can be translated in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, or in the beginning while God was creating the heavens and the earth. But we're going to be looking at that first section of Genesis. And this is a text by Tamar Biala. I told you last week, she is the editor of Dear Shuni. She's also one of their writers. She writes really interesting midrash. And in this case, she depicts God in terms of being a mother. Not just a parent, but a mother, and a mother who births. A mother who births. In this case, birthing worlds. Right? That God as creator is like a mother who births, who creates life by birthing. And so we're going to be looking at how she depicts. And she starts with this quote, which is from Rav Kook. Now, Rav Kook was the first chief Ashkenazic rabbi of Israel. It was not Israel, it was Palestine. He died before the state of Israel was established. He's still one of the major thinkers in modern Jewish thought. He has a very large amount of literature that was published, that he published during his lifetime. Very interesting, thoughtful, and very Zionist. His view was very much that the work that the Zionists were doing was the same as the work that those who built the temple did. That is, they themselves were not priests or Levites. They would not serve in the temple, but they were creating the holy space for God and for the Jewish people to come back to the land and to inhabit the land. And he saw them as important as any of the Israelites who built the tabernacle or the Israelites who built the temple in Jerusalem. And that was his way of understanding what they did. But this is a statement that she begins with. So Bubbie usually be our go-to beginning reader. If you would unmute and read it for us.
Certainly. The defects of the world, both material and the spiritual, all derive from the fact that every individual sees the aspect of existence that pleases him, and all other aspects that are baffling to him seem to deserve purging from the world. This thought leaves its imprint on individuals and groups, on generations and epochs. Whatever is outside one's own is destructive and disturbing.
So what he's talking about is that that we reject that which doesn't really meet our needs, doesn't please us. We reject it for us. We don't necessarily reject it for others, but we reject it for ourselves. We take it out of our lives. That, if you think about it in simplistic terms, because he's talking about both material and spiritual, I despise eggplant. Now, you may love eggplant. Joni enjoys eggplant, but I really hate eggplant. I have never really found any eggplant that I can eat that doesn't disgust me. So by and large, there's no eggplant in my world. It's so disturbing to me that I've destroyed it from my world, right? I mean, that's a simplistic way of thinking about it, but that's true of people. There are people in my world that I have over the years cut off, not necessarily sometimes just because I don't enjoy being with them, or sometimes I just, what Rabbi Davis calls benign neglect them. I just don't write to them, or I don't call them, or whatever, and eventually they drift away. Because I find them unpleasant or disturbing or destructive, right? And there are aspects of my spiritual life that I also have tried to cut out, that I find destructive for me, that I find to be something that displeases me, and I try to embrace only that which does serve my benefit for me. And for you, if it's good for you, if you like eggplant, I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad that you please. I don't need eggplant to disappear from the world or from your life, but from our house, I would prefer it not here. So Joni eats her eggplant outside the house. And I have no issue with that at all. So we're going to go to in the beginning. This is the verse that he quotes from 1:1, and she uses this, Tamar Biala uses this translation of it. At the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was tohu vavohu. She doesn't translate that. I know we usually translate it as void and desolate or something like that. But it's not clear what tohu vavohu means, other than it's not positive. It seems very clear that it's not positive. Darkness over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. So that's a description at the beginning of creation, right? If we look at that, it's as if the first verse is saying, this is the scene in which God created the world, the universe, right? It was tohu vavohu, and there was darkness, and there was this thing called the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, the face of the waters. That's the scene. And now Tamar is going to bring to us something from a midrash from the book of Ecclesiastes. That's what Kohelet means in Hebrew, is Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, the most famous verse from Ecclesiastes, right? To everything there is a season and a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die. That's from the book of Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet. It's one of the wisdom literature books. It's also read during Sukkot. That's when we read this book. It's traditionally written by King Solomon when he was an older man. He wrote Song of Songs traditionally when he was a young man. and Kohelet when he was an old man, bringing his wisdom. So in the book of Kohelet, it says, he brings everything to pass precisely at its time. Now, from the Midrash, we have Rabbi Abba who said, and here it is derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, created worlds and destroyed them. Created worlds and destroyed them until he created this world. So, have you ever heard that Midrash before? Right? Have any of you heard that Midrash before? So imagine what the Midrash is saying. Now, this was written at least 16 to 1800 years ago. This is not the first thing that God created, this world, this universe. God tried many times, and those worlds did not please God. So God destroyed them and started again. Right? God's worlds were defective in God's eyes. Remember what Rav Kook said. It displeased God. So God destroyed those worlds. And then God created this world, which apparently God was pleased with, because God didn't destroy this world, right? Any comments on that so far, or any questions?
Yes, I wonder if he's still pleased.
Well, when we came to Noah, Violet asked about Hamas. In Noah, obviously God didn't destroy the world, but he did destroy most of one of his creations, right? He did destroy a lot of animals. He destroyed a lot of human beings, according to that story. And so a lot was destroyed, but it all started again. God did not destroy the world, and God made a pledge not to destroy by flood again. So that's how the Midrash comes. Now, that Midrash is remarkable because, there are many people who really believe that this was what God created and God intended, and God created a perfect world. From this Midrash, I would say God created a world that was acceptable to God, not perfect. Right? God had tried other times, failed, and got most of it right here, and decided this is the best God could do, and said, okay, it's good enough. Right? That's one way of understanding this Midrash. This world, it's good enough. Let's give it a shot. Let's see how it evolves. And God was pleased enough to let it continue. Okay, so now let's see what Tamar does with this. So now, Bubbie, I'm going to need you, if you would, to continue.
Okay. And God, start there.
Yes.
And God saw all her worlds falling at her feet. And she said to herself, I will just let my heart fall along with them, and I will sit in darkness like those long dead.
Okay, so let's unpack this. First of all, God is her.
Yes.
Right? The creating God is her. And she lets these worlds fall at her feet. That image is of a birthing mother. Right? That's how mothers birthed in biblical and in many beginning societies. They birthed at a birthing stool, upright. And the fetus or the baby fell and was caught underneath. Right? We have adapted the notion of birthing in a bed, though I remember in Jesse's birth, where we were in a birthing room. By then it had evolved, and I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the bed itself became, the bottom of the bed moved out, and it became a place where the baby could be caught, even though it was still a bed. So these birthing stools were somewhat upright so that gravity worked for the birthing process. And the midwives, Pharaoh's midwives, would have caught the baby, literally, coming down. So here you have this image of God as woman, as mother, as birthing mother, with the world she created falling at her feet. So what are these worlds that are falling at her feet? They are not living, right? She is either destroying her own children, or they are stillbirths. But that's the image that Tamar is creating here. And she quotes from Lamentations, which is a book about the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. I will sit in darkness like those long dead. What she's saying is, these dead births, I'm going to sit with them. I am immobilized. I'm going to sit in darkness. Remember, darkness is on the face of the deep, right? In Genesis, darkness is on the face of the deep. That darkness is God herself sitting among the dead that she birthed. This is a pretty graphic image, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So this is God the mother, whose dead fetuses, children, are at her feet, and she is sitting with them, depressed. Her tears and blood are scattered in space, searching for land that would absorb them. And they wept to fragments and pieces, where they fragments and pieces unto all of existence was the cloud and fog of the great deep. So that whole scene, the way Tamar Biala describes it, is what had happened was God, her, the mother, had created these worlds, but they were born either stillbirth, or they died in birth, or she destroyed them for whatever reason. And she sat with them, and she was in tears, and her blood was there. The birthing blood and her own blood was there, and looked for land to absorb them. And these fragments and pieces were there, existing in this cloud and fog, which is the tohu vavohu at the great deep. It's a very, very depressing view, right?
Yes.
And very dark. And remember, everything about her, the first Genesis 1:1 is dark. There's no light. Everything is this hovering. And the Spirit of God is depressed. The Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the deep, right? God tried to look again at the ruins of her worlds and just couldn't. I want to take a minute on that. God tried to look and just couldn't. Have you had trouble this week looking at some of those images coming out of the massacre?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Right? That
So
is so painful that you can't look at it. You can't even hear the stories. It's so painful. And Tamar is depicting God the mother as so in pain, she can't even look at these dead fetuses at her feet. She can't look at these worlds she destroyed. She herself is so depressed. She cannot even bear to look at it.
Does it say that she thinks it as a failure?
Well, we don't have anything about that at this point.
Yeah.
Tamar hasn't commented on that. And the Midrash itself doesn't say that God saw it as a failure. Maybe God saw it as a failure, maybe God didn't. We don't know. The original Midrash from Kohelet Rabbah doesn't say that God looked at God's failure, only that God destroyed these worlds. And Tamar Biala is not necessarily saying it was a failure, but it put God into this terrible depression. Because yes, God wanted to create a world, and God couldn't do it. So certainly it seems to indicate that God must have felt at some point God was failing, right? As a creator. You know, I know that there are people, just read a story of someone, I heard a story of someone who had gone through 9 different years of trying through IVF to give birth. 9 years of it, and continued to go through the process, and actually did give birth through IVF eventually. And looking through all of that, you know, I don't know if a mother in that situation would feel a failure, but she seemed to indicate she felt some of this was her own failure, right? Because it's natural if you want to give birth and you can't give birth, and you're trying to give birth to a whole baby, in some sense, to feel it's you. It's natural to feel that. I don't think that's what Tamar is saying, but I think it's inherent in this description. How do you feel about that?
Well, you can also look at it as practice and keep practicing till it's perfect.
Right. That obviously God, at this point, Tamar is depicting a God who can't keep practicing. This God is immobilized. This mother is just depressed and doesn't seem to have the ability to rise above all the destruction of the worlds that she created. Right? Now, the Midrash is going to go on.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't where it ends, because we got a world. So somehow this God, this mother, finds the strength to go on. So let's see welcome, Alice. Let's see where this mother.
Sorry, I'm late.
It's okay. You'll catch on. We're in a depressing place right now, but we'll get out of here. So I'm going to read this, Bubbie, only because this is very difficult stuff, and I want to keep describing it. She covered herself with this great deep. As it is written in the book of Psalms, you made the deep, covered it as a garment. And she beat her chest and wailed, for from the book of Jeremiah, I shall be a desolation forever. She was so depressed that she took the deep, the face of the deep, and she covered it over herself as if to hide herself. And she said, I'm going to be in this place forever. She gave up. So in the Midrash that Tamar has given us, God is now at the lowest point, at the nadir of her existence. She clearly here, it feels like she has failed and she will never create the world, the baby, the child that she is trying to create. So now we move and we start getting where she gets her strength from. So Bubbie, you want to continue here?
Sure. What did she think at that moment when she could no longer bear to look on those worlds? She remembered that it is said of her, you brought forth the earth and the world and her womb, eternal, and she felt her sons and daughters straining to be born so that they could say in gratitude, for I was not killed in the womb.
All right, you see how she's weaving all these verses from different places,
Yes.
from Psalms, from Jeremiah. And before she had quoted Jeremiah, that is the way Midrash is constructed. Everything that is in the Tanakh can be used as an eternal truth. So she's in this terrible state. She can't bear to look on the worlds. And then she remembers something. She remembers something. One of the most important aspects of Jewish tradition is we have commandments to remember. Not every people has that. Not every religion has that. We are commanded to remember many things. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way. Remember what happened to Miriam. There's lots of remembrances in our tradition, and that's spelled out very often in the prayer book. The Siddur has them. She remembered that it's written about her, you brought forth the earth and the world, meaning you are going to accomplish this. You've got to get up because you are going to accomplish this, because it was already written. The Torah was written, according to Midrash, the Torah was written before God created the world. So the Torah already existed and the Tanakh already existed. All of this existed. So she remembers now, it says that I brought forth the earth and the world. That means that I must have the ability to do that. And she remembered her womb eternal, meaning your womb is not dead. You have still creativity in your womb. And she felt her sons and daughters straining to be born. Why? So that they could say to their mother in gratitude, I was not killed in the womb, meaning you didn't destroy me. You cared about me. You preserved me. We want to praise you. Let us out. You have to birth us or we can never come out. So she got her strength from the very world that was waiting to be born. And remember, the rabbis don't think our world is the only world. They think there are lots of worlds that God creates, not just the ones that are destroyed. That the worlds that doesn't mean that God creates other human life forms. We don't know that, but we know from Midrash that our tradition says God created other worlds, not just this world, and not just the ones that were destroyed. So, Bubbie, where does she get her strength now? What does she do?
She closed her eyes.
Yes.
She closed her eyes, swallowed the pain lodged in her throat, and pleaded for herself that she might find more loving mercy and faith, as it is written, I declare a world of loving mercy will be built. Your faithfulness will be established in the heavens. And from that, she went and created new heavens and a new earth.
All right. So she finds in the book of Psalms this line that says, I declare a world of loving mercy will be built. Your faithfulness will be established in the heavens. So she takes that as giving her strength, and she went and created new heavens and new earth, right? And that's the world she creates, which we inherited. Okay, so now what happens to this world? Let's see where we are. There we are.
When the heavens and earth stood in wonderment and bewilderment to Tohim
Vavohim. She takes tohu vavohu and puts it into the plural. She says there was this tohim vavohim, and she's going to say something about that, this stuff that was on the earth.
She took off the garment of the deep with which she had been covering herself, and that deep of cloud and fog, made of her blood and tears, went and gathered into living waters, and she hovered over them back and forth, as is written, when the earth was tohu vavohu, darkness over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovering over the fact of the waters.
Face of the waters, it's a misprint.
Oh,
Right.
okay. And what was she saying at that moment? That it should not totter and fall forever. And her sons and daughters joined their prayers to hers, and they themselves said that it should not totter and fall forever, that it should not totter and fall forever.
Okay, so what do you take from that? That it should not totter and fall forever, and that her sons and daughters also proclaim that. What do you take from that?
That she felt she created a success.
Okay.
It wasn't going to be perfect.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in? Look at the look at what the way she couches it, that it should, right? Not that it will not fall forever, but it should not totter and fall forever, right?
Does that
Yeah.
mean she thinks she'll interfere? I don't mean interfere, but help whatever she's created along the way.
Well, could be, it could be, or it could be that this isn't a sure thing. What she's looking at, she's hopeful, but she's not sure. And neither are the children. They're hopeful that it will not totter and fall forever. It's a hope, right? And it's a partnership between her and the children. She hopes and they hope. And it takes that partnership to try and make it happen. Right? I mean, that one of the interesting things about this is that the children, obviously, as we're all children of mothers and fathers, some point that is who we are. We don't get to where we are without mothers and fathers, not just the birthing, but helping raise us, good or bad, right? However it is. And at a certain point, it becomes our responsibility. But there's a piece of our parents that never leave us. There's a sense that we have them in us, even if we don't always appreciate what we have of them, right? Good or bad. We carry a lot of that when we're conscious of that. And there is that relationship in keeping the world whole of God and the children that she birthed. But what really interests me as well is how vividly she paints the picture of the world being born and the parallel with a mother bearing miscarriages, stillbirths, the blood, the depression, the sadness, the wanting to take the blanket and cover it over your head and just hide, the nature of feeling so alone and so helpless that nothing can stir you until she remembers something. She remembers something she knew but had forgotten, right? She remembers that her world will be born, that she can bear, that a birth will take place, and that she needs to get up and find the strength to carry on, because her sons and daughters are crying out. They want to praise her. They want to be partners with her, but they can't be if she cannot birth them. And she has to find the strength to get up and bear them. Does any of this resonate? Does any of this feel like this is something? I mean, if you think about, yes, Susan.
I'm struck by the first part where she just sits in total desolation and accepts that. And from that, she has the strength to have the memory. If she were busy running around trying to fight off that desolation and depression, the memory might not be there. And I think for us, it's a parallel that in hard times, it's necessary to just sit there and wrap that cover around you and acknowledge that, so that something inside you can stir and move on.
Good, that's good. So you're saying that her isolating herself, in effect, during that time allows her to think through and meditate and find within her what she always knew but had lost.
Yes.
And she can emerge. And that in times when we're difficult for us, stepping back, this might be, applicable to all the news that's going on, stepping back and allowing us to just breathe and think and feel can allow us to emerge stronger and ready to face whatever we need to face. Good. That's good. Anything else? Someone else have a comment?
A question.
Yeah.
Actually, this is not the first time that I've studied the creation and so on and so on. But, and we've heard sermons and we've read things and so on. I find this fascinating. Her point of view and the whole thing of birthing and so on of the world. Has anybody done this before that even resembled anything like this? Because this is so new from anything that I've run into.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world of women. Because our tradition basically ignored the voices of women for almost our entire history, we have very little writing from women, and certainly not writing in traditional forms until we get basically to the state of Israel, or to in the 18th and 19th century, we start to have Yiddish writing from women. And then we start to have women emerging in our literature as we become more secular. Certainly women in Zionism, women have voices in America, in all kinds of places, but not really until the modern era do we start to see women immerse themselves in art, classical tradition, and bring their perspective. Tamar is a birthing mother. She looks at the creation story different than every man has ever looked at it in our history, right? She says, what's going on here? This is a mother birthing. This is a mother giving birth. This is our mother, God. And this is that aspect of God. When we talk about God as not being male or female, or what God is beyond all of that, but we project on God, and we have traditionally projected on God that he's Father. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, right? That we say over and over at the holidays. But what about Imenu Malkatenu, our mother, our queen? Well, we have Shekhinah, but the men were writing from Shekhinah, and men didn't see themselves as going through a woman's experience. So this is where a woman's perspective brings something that no man really can bring. I mean, a man observes, in fact, most men never even observe birth, right? Until in the first births of our family, when Avi and Sarah were born, I had to fight to get into the birthing room.
Mhm.
With our first births, it was brand new. That was 1970s. It was brand new to get a father even into the room where the mother. In those days, it was a delivery room. It wasn't a birthing room. But even to get in, I had to have permission. To get in, I had to gown up, and we had to go through this whole thing to get permission to do it. So it's really, a man would hardly ever see it unless he were a doctor. And then he might see a birth, though usually midwives did the birthing for most of history. So it was women that were taking care of women, right? And if you see in Call the Midwife, which is a show that I love and I cry every time I see it. Every one of those, I just saw one this weekend just to get my mind off, and I was crying. You know, we didn't see that stuff. So how could we write about it? And by keeping women out, we didn't have the richness of a woman's perspective on our sacred literature. For me, this opens up a whole different way of thinking about God, the creator. Not just the Shekhinah, but God, the creator, not as a man, but as the real creator in our life, a woman, the one who creates life, the one who births, right? That's natural. But who would have thought of that except a birthing mother, right? Someone who actually could look at it and say, but that's my experience. I had miscarriages. I went through this. I had depression. I had postpartum. And I'm looking at this through my experience, and I'm bringing that to the table. And that's not just feminism. One of the things that feminism classically has said is it liberates not only women, but men, right? Because it allows us to see things we could not have seen through just our lens, and that enrich our world as much as they liberate and enrich women's world. Because there's wisdom there that we have shut out for most of our history. And now we're beginning to embrace that wisdom. And that's why this is so important, right? That's why looking at these texts becomes so important. One of the things that Rabbi Leuben taught me is that whenever we do a Devar Torah or do a sermon or teach a class, if we're going to bring sources, at least one of those sources needs to be a woman's voice.
Mm.
I didn't do that before for most of my career. Most rabbis didn't. Most women rabbis didn't. We just didn't think about it. And we didn't have a lot of sources, right? But we are gaining more and more sources. And so since then, that's been for the last few years, anytime I've taught, I've tried to integrate a woman's voice along with the classical text that I use, because I'm stuck with mostly men, right?
Mhm.
So I have to search for a woman's voice, and often it's a voice from the late 20th, early 21st century. That doesn't mean it's not a wise voice. Doesn't mean that these voices are any less important than the voices from Maimonides or Hillel or, they aren't less important. They're just more modern because we didn't allow them to be part of our tradition, right? Any comments about any of this?
I was wondering, since she's writing in Israel and the far right of Israel rabbis, are they condemning some of her writing? I mean, not to do this and I've did with the class, but when you were saying you were bringing female thoughts into your classes, in the reverse, are the male rabbis in Israel declining what she's writing? The ones who were more observant.
So you have to differentiate. There are rabbis in Israel who are not Orthodox, There
true.
are Orthodox rabbis in Israel who are modern and open to this,
Mhm.
who are practicing rabbis, and they're Orthodox rabbis. And then there are non-Orthodox rabbis in Israel, Reform, conservative, Reconstructionists, who are very much responding positively. But more importantly, in Israel, there's a phenomenon of secular yeshivas, secular Beit Midrashim, where secular people go to study traditional texts, and they are open to this, and they are using some of this, and it's spreading. Now, what about here in the United States? Well, since it only became available in English, it meant that if I wanted to teach it before this past summer, I had to translate it.
Okay.
That itself takes a lot of time, because you don't just translate simple text. It's not like translating a speech. You have to go back into all the sources and you have to put it all together. So by and large, it was hard to do. And so it was not done as much as it has been since the text was published in English. But it has been spreading pretty quickly among liberal non-Orthodox Jews and among liberal Orthodox Jews. And it's even being taught at some liberal Orthodox seminaries. I don't know that you know this, but there are liberal Orthodox seminaries that are called egalitarian. And they are teaching this text. And they are teaching it alongside classic texts.
Mhm.
So this is the beginning of this part of the movement that is the next stage from a Jewish standpoint of feminism within Judaism. Not among Jews, but within Judaism. And it will affect, I believe, ultimately, they will, all kinds of sections will be quoting from these texts eventually, but the Haredim, they still only quote from certain texts. They don't even accept many of the men commentators from the past.
Yes.
So we can't expect that they're going to come along, but they're in a very small minority in our people. I remind you, in the entire Jewish world, less than 20% of Jews identify as Orthodox. About 80% identify as other than Orthodox. We're still largely a people that is not Orthodox in any way. We are a non-Orthodox community. We are a very kind of a spectrum of all kinds of practices and beliefs that isn't called Orthodox. That doesn't mean that some of us don't have views that are the same as we would find within Orthodoxy.
Yes.
We don't identify as Orthodox. We don't live Orthodox lives. Oh, 8:00.
Yes.
Okay, time for that. So see you next week, and
Great.
keep yourselves healthy this week.
Thank you. It was a wonderful
Thank
class.
you.
Thank you.
This
Thank
was
you.
great.
Yes. Amazing.
It was great.